Hello and welcome to What the Hack, where we ask what happens when your first sign of a security breach is your accountant calling about the cloud bill. This is the cybersecurity confession booth, where anonymous practitioners share real security incidents and our expert panel breaks down what went wrong and how to do better. I'm Rayna Stamboliyska, CEO at RS Strategy and practitioner in residence at the Paris-based Center for Internet and Society. Today, you will learn how container misconfigurations, admin credentials in images, and the gap between security theater and real protection turned a preventable incident into an expensive lesson. This episode is brought to you by Sysdig, GCP, and Predictive. Hello everyone and welcome to this installment of the What the Hack show. Today we are talking about container security, something that not so many people have heard about, but may end up experiencing really soon. So joining us are Conor Sherman from Sysdig. Hi Conor.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
We are so too. Can you introduce yourself in a few words?
Thank you. Yes, I'm now the CISO in residence at Sysdig. Before that, I was a chief security officer at technology organizations like Updater or Clear, the biometric firm, or Apollo, the financial services organization. And so I have a passion for incident response and specifically cloud security. So I'm really excited here today to be able to talk to you about all things cloud security and container security.
Wonderful. And we have Joe Fay with us as well. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Rayna. How are you doing?
Great as usual. So you've been a guest before on this podcast, and I'm really pumped to have you back. Introduce yourself still for those of our listeners who could be oblivious.
I'm good to be here again. And I'm a journalist and editor. I've been covering technology since, I think before containers really appeared on the scene, and possibly, arguably, before the internet was really a thing. So a really long time.
Well, that gives you a very precious perspective on things, right? I mean, no, that's a real thing. You've seen stuff evolve, so.
I've seen a lot of things go wrong. Yeah.
Well, let's see, because in this season we have a format that's a little different. So we have someone confessing to an interesting container compromise and a resulting crypto miner being deployed in their information system. Let's hear the first part of that confession, how things started.
To protect the innocent, this confession has been voiced by an actor.
Our first warning sign? Our cloud expense alert started pinging us rapidly. Our bill was going through the roof, shooting up into the stratosphere. We knew we had a problem. We only have a small security team. We run cloud native, and we use containers for our applications, because they're easy to get into production. The size of the cloud bill we were looking at, it would have crippled us. Everything pointed to a big problem somewhere in our container stack. One thing was obvious: we'd been hacked.
This is an interesting one. So, Conor, what are your immediate thoughts when you hear small security team and cloud native with containers? What challenges come with this combination?
So this would not be the first team who was made aware of a security event because they got the bill from AWS. That is unfortunately a kind of a sad state for a lot of the cloud deployments we see out there. Because it is so easy to spin up this infrastructure and get going, you see a lot of organizations with huge sprawl, or in the case of this example here, you see an organization who had more cloud than they had capacity to secure. So I'm not surprised by it. I feel for the guy. Seen this happen before. Yes, it definitely is something that happens to a lot of organizations when they don't have the right telemetry and visibility and the ability to see things early. They find things after the fact once they get the bill.
I'll get to the bill thing afterwards, because that's really, interesting for me. But Joe, from your reporting, how common is it for organizations to claim that they follow best practices and still have, fundamental monitoring gaps? Because now what we heard is that they realized something's wrong through the bill, not necessarily through the monitoring. What patterns do you see?
Yeah, well, I guess I've not seen a pattern of people saying that they don't follow best practices. That would be a really interesting confession to hear. But I guess part of what it makes me think is like, okay, the people doing containers might have been following their best practices, and maybe the security team were following their best practices, but they might have been going in different directions, or perhaps they've not actually all sat down together and work out what they should be doing as an organization as opposed to different teams.
Very true. So, we mentioned the billing alerts as a primary threat detection, apparently. What does this tell us about the current state of security monitoring? You both mentioned that this is something that comes quite often as a first red flag. And what would the minimum viable security monitoring be that would have caught that problem earlier?
Yeah, I can give you a few thoughts on this. If I was sitting down with that team before, maybe doing a postmortem with that, and just asking like, what did you have set up? And I had to like show up with my assumptions as I walked into the room, hearing what I just heard. I would have been like, all right, so it sounds like we were at a stage of the maturity where we didn't have even the security technologies provided by the cloud service providers enabled. So for instance, like AWS, they have guard duty. Guard duty is not the end all be all, please, but it's a pretty decent place to start when it comes for trying to find classical known bad, right? When you have things like cryptojacking, or you have compromised accounts, or you have resources spin up that you're not expecting to be there, guard duty does a pretty decent job of telling you the most common threats that AWS sees and alerting you to it when it appears in your environment. So I would walk in thinking like, okay, there was a bit of a miss here. We didn't have that turned on. And the other two things I would say is, in cloud infrastructure, when we're going, like as security leaders, we come in to say like, how do we help the business get where they're trying to get? What is the outcome they're trying to achieve? And cloud infrastructure is just a way to get there. And ideally, it's a cost-effective way to get where we want to go. And a lot of cloud service providers actually give you the ability to put financial thresholds on projects and resources as such. So maybe you terminate resources after a certain dollar amount, or at least you tell somebody that they've exceeded the threshold and budget allowance. And I think that's not often talked about in like security circles, but when you're at the executive table and you're thinking through like, how do I ensure that the CFO or the CIO is aware of options available to them? That is kind of a thing I bring into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting, like, FinOps dominates DevSecOps.
Yes, the money, it turns out, follow the money and you'll get somewhere, right? Like it's an important part of the story to understand that.
No, that's very true. I mean, it's a tongue-in-cheek thing of me, but that's what I gather, right? In a way of having a different, let's say, security monitoring approach. And how do you, both of you, how do you, what are the trade-offs that you mention when we look at the easier to get into production than other things when we talk about containers, right? Because we heard it in the video. The person says they use containers because they're easier to get into production. So what are the security trade-offs here? And what do we overlook when you rush in deployment?
I guess, Conor can probably talk in a lot more depth about this, but just when you speak to people, it's always sort of seems to start from a place of, let's get into production. And what slows down getting into production most of all, it's like security people, compliance people, all those terrible stick in the mud types, depending on your point of view in the organization. These projects may already have been kicked off without anyone on the security side really knowing what's going on there. And when you're tempted into speed, into getting things done quickly, maybe there's not even time for a meeting. Maybe those folks didn't even get invited. Not that I'm sure anyone would not invite Conor to one of these meetings.
Well, I would hope so. I'd feel very offended if they didn't. But it's actually, Joe, it's actually a really, as you were kind of alluding to, it's a really common pattern here. When the priority is, let's bring this software to the internet, get it in front of our customers, and then see what happens. I think a lot of people are surprised by the let's see what happens part of that sentence, right? Because we're saying how fast we get there. Now, the incredible thing about containers as a technology is it allows us to say we only need the parts of the server that are going to host and operate the code, right? So it does allow us to get really small packages. And then you've got services like all the cloud service providers have their version of this, but like AWS or EKS or whatever, where they're hosting underlying servers of Kubernetes. So truly the technology team in the business is only focused on making sure the code they write gets deployed on the appropriate image, pipeline, build, deploy. And it is actually incredibly fast. But I would hold the point of view that says, you don't have to sacrifice quality for speed or resiliency for speed. You can actually solve a lot of that through through having the right conversations and the right incentives lined up at the beginning of this. So I know our gentleman who gave the confession said like, oh, we have a small team. That is the norm. That is not an aberration. And so small teams can have big impacts. It's just about what we're describing here, getting in at the right time with the business to say, okay, great, you're trying to get somewhere. Let me get you there safely. So when you're there, you can stay there and you don't have to roll back.
Right. I'm very glad that you said what happens next, because this is a very fluid, transition to let's see what happens next. So what the person confesses happened to them in the environment that we just discovered. So let's play the second part of the confession.
The astronomical cloud bill wasn't the scariest thing. This wasn't just a service going off the rails. It had to be a cryptojacking attack. Someone had a miner installed, and that meant they had more than initial access. There was a hole in our systems, and someone had taken full advantage. In our logs, we could see weird traffic, unknown containers, credentials showing up where they shouldn't. We did have some cloud best practices for security that we were following, so we concentrated on our container images first. Had we shipped in a container and not scanned the image fully? Well, that would have broken our policy on how we're supposed to work, so we had to check that too. We followed our incident response plan. We tracked down containers that were blowing through our cloud budget and killed them as fast as possible. We did a full reset of all of our user credentials. The biggest issue was booting that attacker out. They had some tricks on trying to maintain persistence to our systems, so that was a slog to get done.
Mm-hmm. So let me turn to you first, Joe. The person speaks of cryptojacking. Can you tell us something about how cryptojacking has evolved as a threat? And is there any increase of cryptojacking infections in 2025? This is what I'm hearing, at least. And why? I mean, what makes it particularly attractive now? And, why now?
I guess cryptojacking, I mean, why pay for your own capacity to mine Bitcoin or whatever when you can pay for someone else's? Many organizations, they're run by nice, honest people. So why they might not think, well, why would you go in and just hijack someone else's infrastructure? These people, that's how they think. They're going to exploit stuff. There's the fun of it. So, of course, why not go ahead and do that? I know it's sort of, I think one list I was looking at recently, it's certainly in the top 10 of potential threats. And if you're doing it at a suitably low level, you can get away with it for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. So it's something that can go for a long time. Conor, can you walk us through like what the cryptojacking attack typically looks like? I mean, there are different types, right? I mean, they're browser based, container based, and so on. Like, how does it work? How does it work? Why is XMRig such a popular choice for attackers? Do you have an idea?
Yes, let's talk about cryptojacking for a second. 'Cause I mean, I think it's important for everyone in the business to understand that if you have a resource that is unprotected and it's sitting idly, there is someone on the internet who would love to put it to work, right? And the thing with like crypto, like when you get to Bitcoin or these cryptos, whatever you start mining is expensive. So why would a threat actor want to do it themselves when they can, ask you to do it for them? And so this is why it's so popular. I was looking at some threat intel research not too long ago, and what the analysts were showing was as there was more volatility in Bitcoin, we saw an increase in the cryptojacking actions happening because the threat actors were betting on a price increase. So mine it today, cash it out tomorrow. But when Bitcoin starts to level off and the price becomes a little more stable and you have less volatility, you actually would see more ransomware because that gave them more time to go through the deployments, encrypt people, and take the payments because they became more of a store of value. So these threat actors are quite smart. They follow the market far more closely than any of us do. So they are paying attention to this. And to your point of like, is it still happening in 2025? 100% it is. Most recently, especially in the Kubernetes world, we just had Ingress Nightmare. And Ingress Nightmare was a vulnerability that came out in March of this year. And it was rather material because what it allowed, the situation that would unfold would be your Kubernetes environment runs on these hosts that are the servers where the shared resources are happening. But for the container to get onto those hosts, it has to go through an ingress controller, a last place for policy checks and making sure the containers have the right amount of resources allocated. But if that thing, the entry point to that is on the internet and it had a software vulnerability like we discovered in March, it allowed threat actors to get in there, run malicious commands, kind of like really at the entry point of this whole system. And then they could deploy their own containers, they could take their own actions and have situations like this where you would have crypto mining. And crypto mining was just the easiest thing to get in there because they could start making money off of it. So yes, it's definitely happening in 25. But if it's okay, I just wanted to comment on the rest of what that gentleman shared too, because or the anonymous individual, because what I also heard was what we see so often in situations and incidents and breaches like this, where all the attention goes to the loud part of the attack, the crypto that's driving up the bill, the mining, and they're going after those resources. But where is the threat actor? The threat actor is not the symptom, right? The threat actor is the individual or groups of individuals who now have access to your entire environment. And this is why it is so important to have proactive defenses in your environment. You can't just rely on misconfiguration detections. But the ability to say, like, we have a threat actor and now they have all these credentials that shouldn't be in places and kicking them out. And they're deploying all these other persistence mechanisms so they stay in the environment. That is common. And that is the real long tail here. That is the real pain to get cleaned up and get the threat actor kicked out, even long after you've turned off the crypto mining.
Yeah, so that was, you sort of anticipate my next question, which is, so the confession, the individual mentions following the incident response plan, which is great. I mean, for a small team with a huge pressure on them.
I give them applause. Many people just throw that thing out the window when it hits the fan. So good job. They actually followed the plan.
Right. I was surprised they had one, and it apparently Maven had been tested. So they mentioned killing containers, resetting credentials, and removing persistence. Right. What is it sound for you? I mean, to me it is, but I'm not the specialist here. What would you add? What would you change in that situation?
I imagine if we had a more detailed conversation with the individual and we could kind of see more details, what we would have learned is that what was shared with us in the confession was the top level containment actions, not necessarily getting down to the remediation and the recovery. Because while yes, you have to figure out where are these crypto the crypto mining resources coming from? What are the images underneath there? How are they getting deployed? Stop them, kill them, get them out of your environment. That's important. Getting rid of the credentials, that's important. All you're trying to do there is stop the blast radius, right? Contain the blast radius, stop the threat actor from doing more harm. At some point, you've got to get back and say, how did they get initial access? Was it that unpatched vulnerability on your ingress controller? Was it secrets that got committed in your GitHub repository and the threat actor got a copy of that and is basically logged in instead of hacking in? So there's so many different ways that initial access can happen. That would be the next thing to come through on that. And then, of course, the recovery piece, like how do you make this thing more resilient in the future? That would be the fun part of the conversation.
Right. Joe, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I think what would be really interesting, as Conor said, to have a longer conversation with this individual, because one of the things that really interests me is, as you alluded to, how people actually implement their plans, assuming they have one, and how durable that plan is once it gets messy, once that fan gets very dirty. And then also how they sort of maintain momentum, because speaking to a number of people who've dealt with emergency situations, it's kind of you run on adrenaline for a while and you deal with the exciting stuff that you've sort of been training for years perhaps. But then as Conor said, it's like, how do you maintain that momentum, that interest when you start getting into less exciting elements of the process, like the ongoing scouring through, tracking down any persistent actors in there, and then also just sitting down and thinking, well, what is it that we've learned? What do we need to do next time? What do we need to start doing to ensure? Well, there will be a next time, but to ensure that we're ready for the next attack. And it could be from the same people, I guess, because they know your system fairly well by that point.
So am I correct to assume that there might have been admin access as an initial compromise factor here?
It could well have been. We don't know quite enough yet. So when most organizations get started, they're especially if they're early in their cloud journey, they're there to explore and test the waters. And one of the fastest ways to test the waters is, of course, you give the engineers who are going to be deploying the code the administrative privileges in that cloud environment. So as you go up your maturity curve, that's one of the things that comes out pretty quickly. You don't want people running around there's no need for that administrative control. So there's kind of administrative control at the cloud level, where you like the actual infrastructure, that could be a problem. There's administrative privileges, or who can deploy what into your environment. Again, that might be everyone in engineering can hit the merge button. It gets built, it gets deployed. And so there's just risks and balances with that to think through too. So while it is possible that administrative access was compromised, it wasn't a requirement. And I think that's important to remember as well. It actually doesn't take a whole lot for there to be enough of an opening for a threat actor to take action and make some money off of your AWS bill.
Yeah. And a last question before we listen to the final part of the outcome of this confession is, the attackers decided to focus on cryptojacking. Mm-hmm. Can this inform us, or what does it suggest about the threat actors? Would worse scenarios could we envision here? The question is to both of you. Who wants to take this one first?
Well, I'm happy to give you my thought on this. So let's go back to the technical piece of this. What exists in that moment with cryptojacking? You have a threat actor who is able to deploy resources into your environment. Okay, so they're able to take action, and they're able to take action with some level of privileges. So now let's just keep that train of thought going. What else could have happened? Well, it's very possible that they could have been the victim of a ransomware event just as easily, where the threat actor, instead of deploying a container where they're trying to mine crypto and calling out to those pools and doing all of that, instead they just turned their attention and said, I'm going to figure out what are the S3 buckets that sounds like it has something important, hit the right APIs, and we're going to pull out the object, encrypt it, and drop it back and just tear through. And in the same amount of time, they could have just locked up your entire cloud environment and put just extortion. Or if your identities were not well managed, they could have taken over, basically elevated, given themselves privileged accounts, kicked everybody else out, and then just held your business at ransom too. So there's different ways they can go wrong really fast.
Joe, what does this tell us about the threat actor?
Well, I guess what Conor was sort of saying earlier, that there's market forces at work. It's what works this month, this quarter, depending on where different attacks, different prices are moving. But I guess I would also be again just sort of thinking, well, what's next? Maybe. No, I can't be more paranoid than someone who is actually a CISO, but I would just always be paranoid about what happens next. I'm sure Conor can reassure us that there is an end to these sorts of incidents and that you can carry on with a certain amount of confidence that you've cleared the decks and that you're in a reasonably resilient state for the future. But I would be seriously thinking, well, what might happen next, and or indeed who else might they have informed about how exactly they got in, what the security posture looks like, and perhaps it will be someone with even more nefarious motives come down the pipe next time.
Actually, Joe, I'd like to echo that for a second, because I think that often gets overlooked in breach response, is the realization that the threat actor had privileged access to your environment. So you actually need to go check and make sure they didn't quietly walk off with some data, schematics, or something else that would allow the next threat actor. Because sometimes what happens is they'll put it in a crypto jacker just to be loud, just to get everyone's attention over here in this account. Well, they jump over to the other account, and that's where they're doing the data theft. And if they may not ransom it, right, because they want to keep it quiet, and then they're going to go ahead and resell that, and they're going to make some more money. This is a threat actor is a collection of professionals who do this for a living, who spend all of their time thinking, how do I monetize my efforts most effectively? This isn't some ragtag group of people in hoodies. This is a professional grade business and this is what they do. So we should give them the respect and say okay, once they're in the environment, they're gonna figure out how do they make as much money off of this activity as possible. So it's more than just the obvious parts. They're the non-obvious parts where you have the reselling of, it could just be the data, but it could also be initial access. Initial access brokers are a whole segment of the threat actor population. It's a thriving business with support lines and everything. So
we need to have a conversation about garment, but not now. Let's because we're heading towards the third and final part, the outcome, the end game. Let's see what happened at the end. Let's hear it from the individual.
Why did this happen? How? The board wanted answers. There was a wrong configuration on one of our apps, making the container publicly available. From there, the attacker was able to look at the running pods and find a vulnerability on the instance to get in. From this, they then enumerated some of our systems and found an account in our developer container images that, had admin rights. Yeah, that was stupid. They used those to install XMRig and start mining. To be honest, they could have done worse. This didn't get the board off our backs. Why didn't we pick up the issue earlier? Why weren't our policies enforced? Why didn't we see it sooner? We had policies, we just didn't follow them. We talked a big game about shift left, but we were still fixing things after the fact. We should have had better infrastructure as code practices in place for our developers. And our security team should have spotted the misconfiguration before it was exploited. What did we change? We went to town on our DevOps process and started testing all the things that we thought we were doing well. This attack cost us, but it could have been a whole lot worse. We were lucky, really.
Oh yeah, they were. I mean, they discovered a wrong configuration, making a container publicly available. That, okay, I mean, it happens. But security failure 101, such as admin account in developer images, hello. I mean, I don't know. It sounds like, you could do worse, you could do better, So, Conor, how do these seemingly small mistakes cascade into major breaches?
Yeah, so it's not uncommon to be in this situation. And one of the things that's easy to do is look back retrospectively and get really focused on that moment and be like, see, that was the one configuration that led to the badness. But what most security leaders are dealing with right now is they're trying to educate their peers in the business and saying, and they're trying to go through this whole thing of like, it's not one misconfiguration, but it's tens of thousands across, and there's all that. And so there's this whole thing of like, how do you prioritize and where does it go? And how do you make sure you focus on the right one and not the wrong one? And it's quite a challenge. There's good technologies that start to help with the cloud security configurations and help you get to the point where you could see you have a container with an exploit on the internet. But this is why I always encourage like a barbell strategy, where it's like, yes, you need the inventory. Yes, you need to know what's going in your cloud, but you do need to jump to the other side pretty quickly and say, how do we assume breach? How do we assume compromise and put some defensive postures in place? So one of the things that our anonymous confession individual didn't say was they didn't talk about actually protecting what's right? There's a whole moment where we're looking at left and how do we stop the thing from happening in the first place? And I think it's very worth our time and attention to do that. But we need to have seatbelts as well as brakes on the car. So we've got to say, how do we make sure that we've got some protections in runtime so that assuming that we don't catch everything, assuming that something's going to slip through the cracks, had this individual had something like protecting their cloud workloads, their container workloads, that would have been really good for them on that day. But they should have also done what they're doing now, which is going left and looking through their CI pipelines, looking through their developer practices and say, how do we make this safer? How do we make this more resilient? Put security and guardrails in place to stop the patterns of bad behavior.
Joe, piggybacking on what Conor just said, like there was this phrase, we talked a big game of shift left, but we were still, fixing things afterwards as an afterthought of sorts. How often do you encounter this gap between, the security rhetoric, or if I were meaner, I would say the security theater, and the reality in your reporting on the industry?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you weren't mean there, Rayna, and said the T word. I guess, I mean, just. I wonder how many people listening to this will hear the fact that it was a developer container and sigh or sort of slap their forehead or whatever emoji they'd prefer to take. It's it's momentum, and it can be exciting to just sort of rush ahead and do stuff, and then at the same time, people have compliance regimes and processes that they have to follow, and but whenever something like this happens, it's always the case that a corner has been cut, or a box that was sort of ticked was in reality not maybe as buttoned down as people might like to have portrayed, and as long as they don't get caught out, that's kind of going to be fine. What I was also interested there was when our confessee was talking about the reaction from the board, and it's like, well, what were the board doing? How were the board pushing things to go forward? How much attention were the board paying on security? And were the board saying, well, are you looking at security? Have you got the right resources for security? Are we giving you the mandate to look at all of this, as well as getting whatever product we want out in the market up and running?
Yeah. Actually, can I talk about that for just a moment? Because I think, Joe, you struck on something that's really important there. When you said where the board, what I heard you say was like the board should have been focusing on that question of, does the security team have the right amount of resources or something along those lines?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I think a lot of practitioners think that the board somehow steps into caring about the misconfiguration and the breach. That's not the job of the board. The board's job is to make sure the management team is focused properly, operating inside their established risk tolerance, and prioritizing resources. Really, at the end of the day, the board's job is to say, okay, the business is going X. How are we managing risks and capitalizing on opportunities? And are you, the management team, equipped and staffed and ready to rock? And are putting the time and attention in the right places, resource allocations. And so I would imagine in a healthy environment, the board is actually pressuring the executive team and saying, demonstrate to me good governance, demonstrate to me that you were thinking about your risks across your enterprise, security being one of them, and that you're putting the right amount of attention, in relation to the opportunities and all the other dynamics that are going on inside the business. So I think that's healthy for boards to put pressure on their management team. It's not healthy if the board's getting into the operations of the day-to-day. That's the time when the management team needs to look at themselves and say, we're doing something wrong here, because they feel they need to do our jobs for us, right?
No, this is very valuable comment from both of you, because I'm hearing a very, let's say, divergent rhetoric becoming prominent way in the ecosystem where I am in Europe, saying to convince, top management, being the board or whatever, to give us more resources. Let's transform cybersecurity from a cost center into revenue generating activity. And this really bugs me, because are we trying to do the same with HR? I mean, it's a support system, right? It protects what creates value in your organization. And labeling or pushing it, engaging into a dynamic where it becomes revenue generating, this is a very different approach to things. I don't know, what's your take on this one? Because it gets me worried, honestly.
When anyone tries to take a square peg and put in a round hole, it doesn't work out very well. So let's look at what is the purpose of a security program as most of them come to life today. It is about, at the end of the day, risk management. It's trying to say, we have this technical lens, this technical expertise of what can go wrong and where we need to be. So the job of the chief security officer is to make sure the security risks, the compliance risks, those are making their way up. And there's a thoughtful framework on how to manage those risks. And then the business will decide how much they want to invest to manage those risks accordingly. Like some companies have multiple product lines. In some areas, they're willing to take on great amounts of risks. And in other areas, they should take on less risks. And they should invest and tailor their security strategy accordingly because of that. But when you try and turn it around and say it's now going to be a revenue producing thing, to your point earlier, that's like asking my lawyer, my general counsel, and say, I'd really like you to increase our pipeline this quarter. Like, why would you do that? Your general counsel is there to guide you and advise you and help you navigate these moments in your business. And that's the same thing that your security program should be doing too, protecting what you have with the resources that have been given, which is dictated by the risk tolerance the business has set.
It goes even further than that, in the sense that it is as if I was telling you, look, you can use my app, it's great. And if you want MFA on it, it's €2 stop or $2 stop on your monthly subscription. We're sort of getting from security as a given, as an embedded feature, into security as an add-on, and this revenue generating, something that you can put a premium on. And this is what kind of bugs me, because it really changes the way we look at security.
Yeah, I guess in this instance, security really did become a revenue-generating operation, just not for the organisation involved. And every security failure, I'm kind of guessing, is potentially a revenue-generating opportunity, just not for the people on the inside. Otherwise, why would the people from the outside be trying to get in there?
So my penultimate question, what are your top tricks to support communication, internal communication from those teams, from those practitioner teams towards management, top management and the board, right? To avoid sort of that discrepancy and weird division of labor that we discussed earlier.
I have two thoughts to share along those lines. And they're just 2 points, kind of takeaways as individual items for the audience here. So the first thing I would think about is it's kind of what we've been talking about. When you have a breach once, you should assume you're going to have one in the future. It's not because of you're terrible at your job or what's something silly like that. No, quite the opposite. As you have an object that is in motion, like your business, and it's under rapid change, like your technology, there's going to be lots of moving parts. And when you have something with lots of moving parts, occasionally something breaks. So when you've had a data point, you have a cultural moment inside your company like this breach, one of the things to do, one of the metrics to take away was how much did this cost us per day or per hour in the dollars, the direct dollars lost, and the indirect costs such as time, breach response, all those things. Bring it together and get an hourly rate or get a daily rate of what it means to have a breach. So the next time you go for those conversations, you can come back and say, we want to improve our ability to detect and respond. We want to improve the quality of our incident response playbooks because we have data now that says, if we can shave off a day for containment, we save this amount of money. If we take off a week, we get this amount of money. And it helps change the narrative from a should to a must. And because now you can put some dollars around what it means, or euros, around what it means to be faster at your response and containment actions. So I just wanted to offer that as one nugget for the team if they've ever gone through a situation like this, there is data to be found there that will help with future conversations. And the second thing I wanted to share was, as the individual was talking about the shifting left and that strategy, that can work and it can work well. But one of the practices I see that I would love to see changed is we still treat the security team like they're special, and we hold our tools and we hold the data that we have to ourselves. A much better approach would to say, if you're the engineer in charge of the authentication service, you're the team who's in charge of the databases, whatever your area of responsibility is, we're going to present the technology, the security telemetry around that technology to you. And then we're going to help coach you through what it means to get a good grade. How do you go from C to D to A? Like, how do we get there? But you're making it visible, actually having scorecards for different teams and the health of their services. And then you're in this really different place where you're that drift protection or checking for secrets in code or whatever the technical control is you want to put in place. You can tell them, hey, we're going to bump you from a C to a B because we have these checks in place now. And that can be a helpful way to get the cultural piece unlocked and moving in the right direction and bring the security team and the engineering teams much closer together.
Thank you. Joe, how about you? Communication tips.
Yeah, I think, I'm a journalist, so I'd always sort of say being open and honest and realistic on both sides. But in the real world, I'm just reminded of a conversation I had with a interim CISO recently, where he was sort of talking about an engagement where the brief was from whoever he was reporting to. They wanted the dashboard to be all green, all problems solved. And his take was, you can have a dashboard that's all green, but it won't be telling you what you need to know, because people will then be targeted on making it all green rather than actually dealing with the real vulnerabilities, the real problems, the real attackers that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I like this as a good enough, So, I just can't let you go because it's super interesting and I'm learning a lot. So, a last question in one sentence, 30 seconds if you like. What is one key takeaway for organizations that recognize themselves in this confession, in this scenario?
All right. They had an instant response plan. That's fantastic. You should have one too. Even if it's one piece of paper that has everyone's phone numbers on it, you should know how to get a hold of the people that matter. An instant response plan was amazing. 2, you can't rely on just trying to get rid of the misconfigurations up front. You do need defense in depth. And if you're in a cloud environment, expect compromise. Have something that's protecting your workloads in the cloud in real time?
And I guess for me, the good answer is to say, speak to an expert like Conor. But my selfish response would be, come and speak to me and tell me about your problems.
You heard them. So I think we can absolve our confessi today. They have been very forward and very sincere. So thank you for listening and watching, and I will see you next time. This episode is brought to you by Sysdig GCP and Predictive. And that's another confession processed in our cybersecurity confession booth. As we part ways, grab your companion resources from the notes and share this episode widely with security and DevOps teams, as the patterns we discussed are prevalent everywhere. Subscribe to What the Hack for more anonymous incidents that help you learn from others' security failures.